Beatrice no longer trusted her son. Peregrine had changed a lot in recent months. Averted glances, mysterious phone calls, vague promises that everything would be fine soon. When he invited her on a yacht trip, saying he wanted to spend time together, something inside her screamed in alarm. Still, she accepted, but she wouldn't go unprepared. She hid a small pocket knife in her purse, inherited from her father, a symbol of protection and survival. In her serene gaze, no one would suspect, but inside she was already preparing herself. The sea, which should have been a scene of peace, would become the stage for bitter revelations. Beatrice had learned her whole life that trust was fragile, and with her own son now, she felt that glass shatter. Intuition told her there was more to this invitation, as if a play had been staged and she were the centerpiece. A chill ran down her spine as she saw her son's careful preparation, the way he insisted on controlling every detail of the outing. Still, she kept her face calm, as if she were happy for the opportunity to get closer to him. Her heart, however, was beating on alert, and the feeling of walking into a trap only grew stronger. On the deck of the yacht, Beatrice watched her son's every move, the way he smiled too much, as if practicing an expression that didn't belong to him. The false touch on her shoulder, the averted gaze whenever she looked at him. It was as if Peregrine was trying to hide something, but couldn't quite disguise it. She remembered the nights she'd seen him distressed, muttering to himself about deadlines and debts. Now every detail made sense. He hadn't wanted her there by accident. There was a hidden agenda. As they moved away from the shore, Beatrice held her breath. The sound of the waves masked the tense silence between mother and son. Within her, memories of past betrayals resurfaced, reminding her that sometimes the enemy dresses in her own blood. Therefore, her mind was already plotting possibilities. She knew she needed to be ready to act quickly, should the stroll reveal its true colors. Deep down, Beatrice couldn't believe that her own son could wish her harm. Her mother's love urged her to forgive, but the signs were all too clear. So she made a silent vow. If Peregrine truly intended to hurt her, she would find a woman different from the one he deemed fragile. She wouldn't be the helpless victim of a tragedy foretold. She would be the survivor, ready to transform every drop of betrayal into fuel for her own victory. Peregrine was neck-deep in debt. Dangerous men knocked on his door demanding immediate payment, and each delay cost him sleepless nights, cold sweats, and a growing fear of being charged with his life. But he saw no way out, at least until his twisted mind stumbled upon a macabre solution: his mother. If Beatrice accidentally disappeared at sea, he would inherit the fortune left by his father, enough money to silence his creditors and restore the life of luxury he so loved. In his mind, it was a perfect plan, a tragic accident at sea that no one would ever suspect. The poison of greed gnawed at Peregrine from within. He saw his own mother no longer as a blood tie, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. The plan seemed too simple: a sudden fall into the ocean, a body swallowed by the waters, a convincing account of, "It all happened so quickly I couldn't save her." The inheritance would come as consolation, and with it his freedom. But the coldness of his thoughts revealed how far he had already gone. The boy who once sought Beatrice's embrace now plotted his own death with calculated coldness. While feigning lightness and affection, Peregrine kept a constant eye on his watch, as if counting down the minutes until his ruse was complete. In his inside coat pocket, he hid forged documents to reinforce his version of the story, already prepared with dates and details that would prove his innocence. Every detail had been rehearsed, from the choice of the most distant point from the coast to the supposed request that his mother enjoy a dip in the sea. He believed he was in complete control of the situation, certain that Beatrice would have no chance. But even amidst his strategies, something haunted him: his mother's gaze. As much as he tried to convince himself that she was merely a target in his game, Peregrine felt that Beatrice saw through his mask. It was as if she knew. The false smile he had practiced in front of the mirror seemed to weaken in the face of her firm silence. He tried to escape this discomfort, distracting himself with orders to the captain and empty instructions about the route. But deep down, he sensed the danger of being unmasked before his time. In Peregrine's mind, there was no room for regret. He convinced himself that his mother deserved this fate, that his coldness was in fact an act of survival. "It's her or me," he repeated to himself, trying to turn betrayal into justification. But fate loves to turn tables, and the best planned plans can crumble before the unexpected force of those underestimated. Peregrine didn't know it, but his victim was already prepared not to be sacrificed, and this preparation would turn his trap into his own sentence. The deck was illuminated by the soft glow of sunset, and Peregrine took advantage of the setting to stage his cruelest play, the warm reunion between mother and son. He approached Beatrice with a forced smile, enveloping her in a hug that felt more like a trap disguised as affection. He murmured sweet, rehearsed words, as if trying to erase years of coldness and distance. "Mother, I really wanted this time with you. I miss the time we were close." But Beatrice, even touched by those words, felt the weight of his falsehood. His tone lacked the lightness of longing. It had the nervousness of a lie. As he spoke, his hands trembled slightly. It wasn't emotion, it was anxiety. His gaze drifted toward the sea, as if calculating distances, as if already foreseeing the moment of his fall. Beatrice noticed every detail. The son, who had previously barely noticed her presence, was now suddenly attentive, offering glasses of wine, asking about childhood memories, trying to elicit smiles that wouldn't come. It was a desperate performance, a rehearsed reconciliation to mask the true intention that pulsed behind every word. With her strategic calm, she let him believe she was convincing him. She pretended to laugh at old stories, accepted the toast, even allowed herself to appear touched by his words. But deep down, Beatrice kept her eyes open for every contradiction. The son, who had once distanced himself out of pride and greed, now seemed overly affectionate, as if trying to numb her distrust. With each exaggerated gesture, each "Mom, you are everything to me," her certainty solidified. This was theater, and the stage was about to collapse. The tension grew like a taut rope about to snap. Beatrice felt her heart pound, but not because she believed those words. It was because her intuition was confirmed. If Peregrine had truly changed, he wouldn't need to hide behind averted glances, nor hide the cold sweat running down his forehead. The silence between sentences weighed more heavily than the words themselves, revealing everything he was trying to hide. Beatrice knew that sooner or later, the sweet talk would turn into blatant venom. At that impromptu dinner on the water, mother and son were locked in an invisible duel. He believed he was directing the scene, but it was she who analyzed every detail, patient as someone watching a trap slowly close. Peregrine saw a fragile woman, ready to be deceived by a false reconciliation. But what he didn't imagine was that Beatrice had already decided she would let her son believe her charade, only to turn the tables at the right moment in a way he would never forget. The play was just beginning. The yacht was already far from shore, the open sea stretching around it like an unwitnessed abyss. Peregrine knew this was the perfect setting for the climax of his plan. With a cold smile, he approached his mother and suggested, as if offering a gift, "Mom, the sea is beautiful today. Why don't you take a dip? You'll feel free, like the old days at the beach." His voice seemed calm, but the urgency between the lines betrayed his nervousness. Beatrice noticed. Each syllable was a knife hidden beneath a veil of forced tenderness. He insisted. He talked about how therapeutic the ocean was, how she deserved to enjoy life, how this would be a unique moment between mother and son. But Beatrice wasn't blinded by the spectacle. Her serene eyes reflected the clarity of someone who had already discovered the lie. The invitation wasn't innocent. It was the final bait, the decisive step toward pushing her into the sea. Even so, she remained calm, pretending to consider the idea while discreetly tightening her grip on the small pocket knife. The wind blew stronger, and the tension seemed to merge with the swaying of the waves. Peregrine paced back and forth like an impatient predator, searching for the perfect opening to act. Every second was a test of his nerves, and with each passing moment, the fear of failure consumed him. His mother, however, showed no rush. She looked at him with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome of this performance, as if silently saying, "Whatever you intend, you will not succeed." Then the awaited moment arrived. Peregrine, no longer disguised, stood behind Beatrice as she approached the shore to gaze out at the sea. His eyes shone with a sickening mixture of fear and excitement. The push was about to come, the final blow to his dark plot. But what he didn't know was that Beatrice was no longer playing the victim. The fragile woman he imagined had long since died. In her place was someone ready to transform fate. In that instant, time seemed suspended. The sound of the sea fell silent. The wind ceased to be heard, and only their hearts beat like war drums. Peregrine raised his hand, prepared for the treacherous gesture. But Beatrice, with the serenity of someone who anticipated every step, slowly turned, looking him in the eye. Shock paralyzed him. It was as if she had been waiting for this very second, as if she had planned to reverse the trap against her own son. This critical moment would not be her end. but the beginning of her decline. The silence that followed the attempted shove was cut by Beatrice's gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, but an almost supernatural firmness, as if the sea had lent her the strength of its waves. Peregrine expected to find panic, pleading, desperation, but he found only a serene smile laced with irony. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice, my son?" she said, her tone calm but sharp as a blade. In that instant, his perfect plan began to crumble, not from physical force but from the revelation that his mother already knew everything. Beatrice took a step back, removing herself from her vulnerable position near the edge. Her erect, firm posture demonstrated something Peregrine had never seen: power. She revealed that she could swim, something he had believed impossible. Years earlier, as a young woman, she had secretly overcome her fear of water, teaching herself as if preparing to face an uncertain future. "You thought sharks would be my end, but you forgot that I learned to swim better than many sailors," she declared, leaving her son in shock. Peregrine's face transformed. His confident smile cracked, revealing a growing dread. His entire strategy had been based on the image of a fragile, defenseless mother, incapable of surviving the ocean. Now the truth crushed him. Not only would she survive, but she was ready to face it. His son, who thought he was the hunter, discovered he was prey. Fear began to eat away at him, and his voice trembled as he tried to regain control. "Mother, you're misunderstanding." But Beatrice no longer believed his words. With firm steps, she approached him, each gesture charged with intensity and silent vengeance. She revealed that she knew about the dangerous men, the unpayable debts, the secret encounters. Nothing had escaped her eyes. "You wanted my inheritance, Peregrine. Then listen. My life is not currency to pay for the sins of your ambition." With each sentence, her son shrank further, as if before a ruthless tribunal. For the first time, he saw himself disarmed, without masks, without excuses. The deck became the stage for a brutal reversal. The role of victim had disappeared. Beatrice was now the judge and Peregrine the defendant. The mother who had once protected, forgiven, and believed revealed herself to be a different woman, someone who had learned from her scars and transformed pain into strength. She not only saved herself from the cruel fate her son had prepared for her, but also proved herself above the trap. Peregrine, astonished, realized that his greatest mistake was not planning the crime, but underestimating the mother who had brought him into the world. The deck was now a battlefield. The tense silence of the sea mingled with the sound of Beatrice's steady footsteps, advancing toward her son with the calm of someone already holding victory in their hands. Peregrine, for his part, retreated like a cornered animal, trying to piece together the farce with fragile words. "Mother, I just wanted to protect us, you don't understand." But Beatrice silenced him with a look that stripped him of any lie. She had already put all the pieces of the puzzle together: the debts to criminals, the staged affection, the theater of reconciliation. Now he had nowhere to run. Peregrine tried to regain the upper hand, raising his voice as if to intimidate her. "You don't know who I'm dealing with, otherwise they'd kill me," he shouted, desperation evident in every word. But Beatrice remained calm, and her response was like a direct blow. "And to save yourself you chose to sacrifice me? Is this the man I raised? A son who would rather sell his own mother than face his choices?" The words pierced his heart like blades, exposing his weakness, his cowardice, and the hollowness of his morals. Tensions escalated as Peregrine tried to force her back against the edge. It was his last resort, to turn the confrontation into brute force. But Beatrice, surprising him, reacted swiftly. She grabbed his arm, digging her nails into him like claws that stirred primal fear within him. The hidden pocket knife gleamed in her hand, not as a lethal weapon, but as a symbol that she would no longer be easy prey. Peregrine staggered, shocked by the strength he had never imagined existed in his mother. "You're not who I thought," he murmured, his face etched with the terror of losing control. The psychological duel intensified with each passing second. Beatrice revealed details she knew about her son's shady dealings, demonstrating that her silent vigilance had seen everything. "I knew about the nights you sold your dignity for empty promises. I knew about the dirty hands you were involved with. And yet you believed I would be the weakest piece in this game?" The weight of the truth fell upon him like an anchor, and Peregrine felt the ground slip beneath his feet, not from the rocking of the boat, but from the collapse of his arrogance. The physical and verbal confrontation reached its climax. Beatrice's eyes burned like fire, and Peregrine's reflected only despair. It was the perfect reversal. The once protective mother became the force crushing him, and the once manipulating son became the victim of his own cruelty. The surrounding ocean seemed to watch in silence, witness to the justice being served on deck. The tables had been turned, and in that instant, Peregrine understood that he was fighting not just his mother, but the force of all the mistakes that had brought him here. The captain watched from afar, his hands steady on the helm, but his eyes focused on the scene unfolding on deck. He had accepted Peregrine's money, believing he would be merely an accomplice in a silent accident, nothing more than a dirty but quick task. However, seeing Beatrice face her own son with such dignity and strength, something inside him shifted. The image of that woman resisting was not that of a victim, but of someone carrying a weight of pain and courage no one could ignore. The purchased loyalty began to crumble in the face of the truth that leaped before his eyes. Peregrine, noticing the captain's gaze, tried to reinforce their complicity. "Do as agreed," he shouted, his voice filled with rage and desperation. But the captain didn't respond. His expression hardened. Until that moment, he believed he was merely facilitating the life of a young heir in trouble. Now he saw that he was about to dirty his hands with a monstrous crime, a son plotting his own mother's death. The money he had received seemed to burn a hole in his pocket, and the moral weight began to suffocate him more than any debt. Beatrice, without taking her eyes off her son, sensed the captain's conflict. Then she spoke, not to Peregrine, but to the man commanding the ship. "Do you really want to carry this guilt? To be remembered as the one who helped a son kill his own mother? Look at me. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. And if you have the courage, you can still choose the right side." The words crashed over him like heavy waves, revealing a choice he could no longer avoid. The captain took a deep breath and took a stand. The decision came as a rupture. The captain took 2 steps forward, standing beside Beatrice. The simple gesture was like a stab to Peregrine's pride. His son couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man he had bought had now turned against him. "Money isn't worth your soul, boy," the captain said firmly, breaking the silent pact that had bound them. The betrayal was no longer from mother to son, but from accomplice to mastermind. Peregrine felt the world crumble beneath his feet. Rage overcame Peregrine, who roared like a cornered animal. He tried to regain control, accusing the captain of treason, of cowardice, of being manipulated by a woman. But the truth was clear. The mask had slipped, and now he was alone. The man who should have ensured his victory had surrendered to Beatrice's unexpected strength. Fate, once again, was turning the tables. And Peregrine, in despair, began to realize that his own life hung by a thread, not at the hands of the criminals who were charging him, but by the inevitable weight of his own downfall. The deck became the final arena. The captain now stood beside Beatrice, and Peregrine, completely isolated, felt defeat approaching like an inevitable shadow. Despair gripped him, and the young man was no longer the arrogant son who plotted his mother's death. He was simply a cornered man, driven by his own greed and fear. He tried one last trick, advancing on Beatrice, but his movement was clumsy, born of blind fury. She, prepared and firm, dodged with precision, allowing his own haste to backfire. In his attempt to throw her off, Peregrine lost his balance. The wave-wet deck betrayed his confidence. One slip, one stumble, and suddenly he was on the edge of the abyss he had prepared for his mother. His arms flailed in the air for support, but the captain didn't move, and Beatrice, steadfast, simply watched. Fate was relentless. The predator was about to taste the bitterness of his own trap, and in the blink of an eye, Peregrine fell into the dark waters, swallowed by the sea he thought he controlled. The shock of the icy water brought him the realization of his failure. He swam desperately, but not with the skill needed to resist the force of the waves. His muscles grew heavy, dread grew, and the salt burned his lungs. It was ironic. The son had entrusted his mother's death to the sharks, but now he was the one who felt the sea as a mortal enemy. From the deck, Beatrice watched him in silence. No cries for help could erase the memory of betrayal. No pleas could restore the shattered trust. The minutes dragged on like eternity. Peregrine struggled against the ocean, but each stroke seemed weaker, each movement more desperate. The captain looked away, unable to bear the weight of the scene. But Beatrice, steadfast, kept her eyes fixed on her son. It was the final judgment. For the first time, she didn't reach out to save him, as she had so many times in her life. For the first time, she chose herself. Revenge needed no words. It was written in the silence of her decision. Peregrine's fall was not merely physical. It was the fall of a man who believed he could manipulate, deceive, and destroy the one who gave him life. The sea swallowed him as a witness to poetic justice. The hunter became prey, and the traitor, a victim of his own trap. Beatrice, serene, felt the weight of the cycle end. There was no hatred in her heart, only the certainty that fate had given each of them what they deserved. Her son chose his ruin, and she finally chose freedom. Beatrice remained motionless on the deck, watching her son struggle against the choppy waters. There were no tears, no despair, only the stillness of someone finally understanding that maternal love could no longer be used as a chain. For the first time, she didn't rush to rescue him. Her heart, which had so often given in to the instinct to protect, now chose another route, to protect herself. Revenge came not with screams or violence, but with the silent decision not to intervene. This choice resonated louder than any physical punishment could. The sea roared around, an accomplice to this relentless justice. The son, who once believed he controlled his mother's fate, now found himself devoured by his own trap. His screams were lost in the wind, his pleas dissolved in the salt water. "Mother, please," he screamed desperately, but each word sounded like an accusation against himself, reminding him of all the times he had used her love to manipulate. Beatrice simply closed her eyes for a moment and silently let the answer come from the ocean. There was no turning back. It was strange how pain could turn into peace. Beatrice's heart no longer beat with the anxiety of being betrayed, nor with the guilt of feeling inadequate for her own son. She was free, free from manipulation, free from the burden of saving someone who didn't want to be saved, free from the burden of carrying a son who saw her as a bargaining chip. The silence of her decision was, in fact, a cry of liberation. For the first time, Beatrice was choosing herself. The captain watched the scene in shock, unable to comprehend such coldness, and at the same time, such courage. He knew that this choice was not born of cruelty, but of a lifetime of pain, humiliation, and scorned love. It was the cruelest and most just revenge of all, letting fate do its part without dirtying his own hands. The captain understood then that this was not murder. It was a settling of accounts between mother and son, where only one would survive the weight of their own history. And so, as the waves closed the cycle of Peregrine, Beatrice turned her back on the sea. There was no triumph in her expression, no joy, only serenity. The past could not be changed, but the present offered her something she had never had, choice, and she chose to move forward. Revenge lay not in watching her son die, but in never again allowing herself to be held hostage by the twisted love he represented. The silence of her decision would be her eternal victory, and the sea, the guardian of the secret that freed her soul. When the yacht docked back at the port, the sun was already rising on the horizon, dyeing the sky gold and scarlet. Beatrice stepped off the boat with firm steps, as if each movement were a silent declaration of victory. The sea, which had once represented a planned tomb for her, was now merely a testament to her resilience. There were no chains on her feet, no shadows on her shoulders. She breathed deeply, as if reborn after crossing a valley of darkness, feeling the air of freedom fill her lungs. She was a different woman. The captain followed her in silence, not daring to interrupt the moment. He knew he had witnessed something he would never forget, not the fall of a man, but the birth of an unshakable strength. Beatrice didn't need to explain what had happened. Her eyes said it all. They carried not the weight of pain, but the lightness of liberation. Each step away from the dock was like a definitive break in the chains of the past. She was no longer the betrayed mother, but the woman who had survived the worst kind of enemy, the one born from her own womb. Upon arriving in the city, Beatrice didn't try to hide or cry in secret. She went out to meet life. She sat in a cafe, ordered her favorite drink, and watched the hustle and bustle of the streets as if seeing the world for the first time. The sounds, the smells, the faces of the people, everything seemed different, more intense, more real. It was as if every detail said, "You won." And indeed she had, not by destroying her son, but by rebuilding herself. She made a silent decision. From then on, she would live for herself, not to carry the burdens of others. Traveling, writing, laughing, loving again, nothing was forbidden. The life that once seemed imprisoned by maternal obligations and invisible pain now opened before her like a vast horizon full of possibilities. The past no longer defined her. The present was her throne, and the future, her rightful inheritance. Beatrice had been reborn from the ashes of betrayal, transformed into a symbol of strength and dignity, and so her story became more than revenge. It became a lesson, because true victory lay not in watching her son fall, but in finally choosing her own freedom. Beatrice, the woman who had once been pushed into the sea by the arms of the blood she bore, now emerged sovereign, master of her own destiny. Her revenge was silent, but her rebirth was deafening. Moral of the story: no betrayal can erase the strength of someone who chooses to be reborn. When life tries to drown someone in a sea of pain, that person can emerge even stronger, transforming wounds into wings. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, like it, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice is part of this journey of justice and resilience.